for the introduction, and thank you especially for the invitation to take part in this book launch. I feel it a great privilege to speak before such a distinguished audience. And it's also a great pleasure for me to speak about the work of Dr. Rabia Akhtar, whom I had the good fortune to get to know some years ago at an institution that has what still seems to me the slightly curious name of the Nuclear History Boot Camp. It's a summer school organized in a town in the hills north of Rome by a project on the Nuclear Proliferation International History Project, which is organized based at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. And the co-director of the project, Christian Ostermann, is here today. I'm very glad that he is. So, Dr. Rabia, if I may use what seems to be a Pakistani form of address, was a member of the boot camp some years ago. I don't remember exactly when, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And the boot camp is devoted to a discussion of the international history of nuclear weapons, centered around a series of lectures, but also around the work of the graduate students who come from all around the world, who take part in the boot camp, a group of about 50 each year. For me, it's been a remarkable experience to meet graduate students from many different countries. I won't list them, but certainly a number of graduate students from Pakistan who have all created a very strong impression, I might say, of those of us who take part in the boot camp. And so it's a particular feeling of honor, actually, to be here to talk about your book. Now, I mentioned that this boot camp is devoted to international history. I have an interest in the international history of nuclear weapons, but I'm no expert on Pakistan. And I must make that clear at the very beginning, even if it doesn't become clear during my remarks. But I do think that the book, The Blind Eye, is significant in 2 broad areas. One is in the international history of nuclear weapons, because a major part of that history, some part of it is to do with nuclear crises, the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, but an extremely important part of it is the effort to construct an international order that will regulate or guide the way in which states handle nuclear issues, both issues relating to the peaceful uses of atomic energy, but also to the military uses. So we can think of arms control as one element of that order, or we can think of the nuclear non-proliferation regime as another element of that order. I won't say the order is complete, it's constantly in flux, and I won't say the order is always just, because the relationship between justice and order in international politics is a perennial issue. The second area, which it seems to me the book is very obviously relevant, is in relations between the United States and Pakistan in the context of the non-proliferation regime. And it throws, in that context, very interesting light, I think, on US non-proliferation policy in a very specific and well-grounded and well-researched way. The history covered in the book, as Ambassador Naqvi mentioned, it covers 5 presidential administrations, and it's a complex history, but it has many twists and turns, many ambitions on both sides, many disillusionments, setbacks, resentments. But one of the striking features of the book is the clarity with which all of this is explained. You might think that writing about congressional amendments to legislation is not a page-turning topic, but let me assure you that it is. As I discovered, I think I hadn't always taken that view, but to read about the wording of the different amendments, Pressler Amendment, the Symington Amendment, the rejection of a particular amendment advanced by Senators Alan Cranston and John Glenn, gives one a good sense of the care and subtlety with which these amendments were worded with particular goals and particular commitments in mind. It's also the case that the book is based on extensive research in the American archives. And it's striking to me that although Pakistani archives are not open, there is quite a lot of information, of course, about Pakistan's policy in the exchange, in the American archives, in the exchanges between Pakistani and American officials. Still, one has to say that it would be interesting to get the Pakistani side of the story in more detail. We have a story of a clear determination on the Pakistani part to develop nuclear weapons in the context of the threat from China. And we have a more nuanced picture, in a way, of American thinking, American shifts, American movements. One of the questions that remained in my mind at the very end was whether, if we had more access to the Pakistani sources, we would have such a straightforward and clear picture of Pakistani policy. Were there moments at which things could have taken a different turn, not necessarily because of US policy, but maybe because of internal disputes within Pakistan itself? And so, Thorsten Veblen said, every good piece of research creates two new research questions. So I think that's one of the questions that this book left in my mind. So what does the book tell us? Let me say, what does it tell us about non-proliferation? And in particular, the US non-proliferation policy. In 1964, after the Chinese test, President Johnson set up a committee, the Gilpatrick Committee, to look into US non-proliferation policy. And they considered a number of 4 different kind of options for the policy, ranging from, we'll just continue on an ad hoc basis, which is how they characterized US policy up to that point. And another was to make non-proliferation the overriding goal of American foreign policy. Well, that last goal was rejected as being impractical. And so the conclusion was just have a harder policy on nuclear non-proliferation. And I think the conclusion of the committee is important because it shows a recognition that no matter how important non-proliferation was for US policy, there were other priorities that could have a greater priority, or greater salience. Nevertheless, the notion of a harder line espoused by the Gilpatrick Committee, of course this is 10 years before Rabia's book begins, we do see that in play at certain periods, especially during the Carter administration. Secondly, I thought that what the book brings out clearly is the use of waivers in the amendments, that certain sanctions, for example, could be waived, or the imposition could be waived, if the president would certify certain things about, for example, Pakistan not having a nuclear weapon, or certify that the policy of cooperation with Pakistan would lessen the chance that Pakistan would develop a nuclear weapon. But of course, the story goes well beyond waivers to the situation in which US administrations, in particular the Reagan administration, ignored things it knew and asserted that it believed statements that it knew were not true. This, of course, is the blind eye. And let me just read one quotation from the book. On the Pressler Amendment from 1985, saying that the Pressler Amendment allowed Reagan, and I quote, to certify that Pakistan did not possess nuclear explosive device, and that the US aid was helping in moving Pakistan away from a weapons option. None of that, of course, was true, and was understood not to be true at the time. Nevertheless, it's the complexity of the politics. This was, of course, the time of the US involvement and cooperation with Pakistan in undermining the Soviet invasion, Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So this approach, in a way, was a mechanism to allow the US to pursue what it saw as a more important priority, namely countering Soviet expansion and indeed ultimately weakening the Soviet Union and thereby contributing to the end of the Soviet regime. That itself raises a lot of problems about an international order that's maintained by one particular state, because if there's a contradiction between the order and the interests of the state in some particular incident, then that order will be to some degree compromised. On US-Pakistani relations, here I think Dr. Rabia's admonition is to look at the history of that relationship with a cool eye, to recognize US help to Pakistan, to acknowledge what Pakistan did and to own it. And here let me offer two quotes from the book. One from page 3. This book is an attempt to look at Pakistan-US relations in light of the untold story of US non-proliferation policy towards Pakistan. Pakistan scholarship on the subject and popular narrative of Pakistani-US relations does not acknowledge US accommodation of Pakistani national interests at the cost of the former's non-proliferation policy. It is time that that debt is paid. And then on page 329, the theft, the lies, the deception, the duplicity, and the manipulation that Pakistan is faulted for by the West, all of it was Machiavellian, essentially needed to achieve its national security interests. This is the narrative supported by history as presented in this book. Pakistan needs to own it and to shun the apologies. I'm very glad this book was published in Pakistan, and clearly it's important for Pakistani history. But I very much hope it will be widely distributed in the United States, because it has lessons for US policy as well, and for our understanding of US non-proliferation policy. I think the title, Blind Eye, is a wonderfully appropriate title. And I was very struck by one passage, if you'll permit me just one more quotation. It's when the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping visited Washington in January 1979, at the time of normalization of US-China relations, he urged the Carter administration to give Pakistan substantial economic and military aid. Now, this is before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Speaking of Brzezinski and Cyrus Vance, explained that Pakistani nuclear policy made that problematic. Dunn asked why the US could not, and I quote, turn a blind eye to the nuclear reprocessing issue, end of quote, and US law, why US law could not be changed. Brzezinski and Vance replied that the law was clear and could not be changed, but under the pressure of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the law was changed and the policy was changed. The blind eye was indeed turned. And that suggests to me a metaphor for Rabia's book. It's a cool eye. It's a clear-eyed look at a controversial and complex relationship. It's based on very serious research. It's dispassionate. It's generous in its judgments, to my mind. It's willing to look reality in the face, and it's deeply felt, and a cause for celebration on its appearance today. Thank you very much.